So we're going to get to the good stuff, and that is our dear brother Asar Imhotep. Really excited about having him on the show today.
My good brother, welcome.
Peace and blessings. Thank you for having me.
Yes,
And
sir.
peace and blessings to the listening audience, those of you who are listening live, and of course, those of you who will catch the archives. I'm blessed to be here.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure and a blessing to have you, brother, especially in this time frame that we're in right now. Somebody sent me a video with Cat Williams talking about and expressing it, and it's a question sometimes I usually ask myself. With so much going on, is it a curse or a blessing to be living in this point in time in history, with so much going on? And he elaborated on it and said it's a blessing for us to see some of the ushering in of some of the things that are going on our planet that, that is, we're undertaking right now as far as knowledge is concerned. So I guess it is a blessing. And brother, you're leading the way, and really taking us to another level. So my brother, my good brother, you've been working diligently and researching, and we want to, bring this out right now and letting our listeners know that you just published a book.
Yes.
And which number book is this now? I don't think it's your first.
No, I believe this is like number 6 or 7.
Oh wow. Okay.
I gotta count.
Yeah, count yourself, huh? See, and that lets our listeners know right there that you've been doing some work and doing some research. You know what I mean? Because to get 6 or 7 books, brother, it takes some time and energy. And it takes some time and energy. And
Okay, he said it takes some time and energy, and we want to acknowledge the truth in that. But kudos to you for being productive. Some folks write one book and they out. You on number 6 and number 7, and I have to include myself in that because I just have one book. But keep
Yeah,
doing what you do, brother, for sure.
yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely. But brother, so tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you. What was the inspiration as far as the book is concerned, and and I guess you can tag along too. What are people looking to get out of this book?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yes. Well, the inspiration goes back to my undergrad days in the late '90s when just graduating high school, going into college at Southwest Texas State University, which is now Texas State. Uh, I was introduced to the realm of scholarship that was, and I should say anti-Afrocentric scholarship that was attacking African people doing scholarship about Africa. And also, this systematic attack on the book Black Athena by the late Dr. Martin Bernal. And so the question was on the origins and the makeup, the so-called racial makeup of the ancient Egyptians. So that's the overall basic issue here. And so there are a lot of arguments that emerge for and against the argument that ancient Egypt was a Black African civilization. And one of those arguments was put forth by the late Senegalese Egyptologist, Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. And in his argument, he stated that the ancient Egyptians, one, were Black African people. And not only were they Black African people, but they, in fact, named themselves in relation to their Blackness. So there's many names for what we're now calling Egypt. But one of the names was Kemet. And it was believed that the word Kemet derived from a root Kim in the language that means black. And so the Egyptologists defined the name Kemet as the black land, referring to the color of the soil on the ground left from the flooding that brought the alluvial soil down with it into Egypt and flooded its banks. And so outside of that, Shekinah Job says, no, this means black people. And there is a special hieroglyph that or I should say, hieroglyphic combination of the word Kemet that shows people at the end of the word. And so he used that reference to Kemet to say that the ancient Egyptians referred to themselves as black people. And so this caused a back and forth between laypersons and scholars for several years. And I got into that debate. And, you know, when I really started to sit down and look at all the arguments and, you know, to step back and have an objective view of it, I come to disagree with both camps, that the word Kemet did not mean black land, nor did the word Kemet mean black people, and that it really meant farmland, you know, a wetland, a land with an abundance of water and trees and vegetation, right? So it's a description of land, but it's more so the presence of water for which they named it. And so this started, of course, now I'm in these debates with scholars on both sides. And so over the years, I have written on the subject, I have debated the subject. And so now it all accumulates in the text, you know, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, towards the subtitle, Towards an Etymology of the Place Name Kemet. And so it really goes deep into the language, the psychology of African people, you know, why we name things the way we name things, what is the importance of such naming practices, and where else can we find Kemet across the continent, right? Like, people don't realize that the capital of the Luba kingdom in the Congo was named Bukama, and Bu being the place prefix is equivalent to the suffix T in ancient Egyptian, right? That same Bu is part of the name Buganda. The B has been lost over time now, so now we just say Uganda. And matter of fact, that word Uganda is a dialectical variant of the word Kemet. And I show in the text, you know, how, you know, we as professional linguists go about determining relationships between languages and how to determine a cognate between language A and language B, and how the word Buganda, now Uganda, is the same word as Kemet, and what that really means in the context of ancient Egyptian and African history, and how all of this actually ties all of us together, because there's several places named Kemet all throughout the continent. And so it's part of a larger discourse. That's why it's under, although in this first volume, it is dealing with a linguistic question, it's under the conversation, the broader conversation on the race and identity of the ancient Egyptians. So what I'm doing in this series is going to be a total of 3 books, is showing how the ancient Egyptian culture, people, history, language, psychology, rituals, and the like cluster with Africans in West, Central, and Southern Africa in a very serious way. And I dare to make the argument that it is impossible. And I'm a speak and I rarely do this, and so this is also kind of clickbait, but at the same time, it's true because I always advise never to speak in absolutes, but my absolute contradiction to my statement that I just said is that it is impossible for you to truly understand ancient Egyptian culture, psychology, its history without understanding West, Central, and Southern African languages and cultures. It's impossible.
Good point.
And this is what the series brings out in the larger scope of the conversation.
Wow, I like that. That's dynamic right there. Yes, because they want to, east, northern and history and scholars. They try so hard to separate that. It's like they want to carve out that the whole Egyptian and Eastern African region, and make it separate from the rest. But like we talked about before, is that Egypt is just, the pinnacle of all these, civilizations who brought forth that particular energy. And I find it really strange that we still having these debates when you have Greek scholars who visited Egypt and studied in Egypt, in certain time frames, who went back to Greece and talked about in their writings that the Egyptians was black. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's funny that we are still having these debates on that, and then we have these, you have it across the board. I'm talking about some of these white scholars that they just don't want to touch about, like you mentioned, Bernal, and then you got Churchwood, and you got Massey, and you got J. Anthony West, and all these people who's halfway true to their scholarship are talking about that. And you talk about the great Shakata Drope, doing the melanin dosage test, and him, why is these folks working so hard? To take the blackness out of Egypt, man. And I think it's a great thing for us to know that Egypt ties into, or like you just said, the rest of Africa ties into the Egypt with the language and the customs. And so let me close in this particular statement with saying that when I went to Ghana, me and my brother, went to this shrine, and the keeper of the shrine came out and started talking about it. We was on our way to Kamasi, and he started talking about the shrine. And the first couple minutes, 2 to 3 minutes out of his mouth, he said, "We migrated out of Egypt in sub-Sahara and came to West Africa." And I said, "What did you just say?" Because at that time, you seeing documentaries on TV. Who are the ancient Egyptians? Where did they go? Where did they be? And this man right there in his first 5 minutes of his statement and talking about shrine, talk about the travels that coming from ancient Egypt into the west coast of Africa. And I
You
was like,
know,
wow, they just go and talk to the people. The people tell you who they are and what they are, you
I,
know?
I
So it's
want to
amazing.
I want to ask this question, Asar, because I think when we look at geography, we
Hmm.
relate to the current boundaries. For instance, Egypt, for instance. When we
Hmm.
when we think of Kemet, though, we can't think of the current boundaries that they have for that country. So, can you give us an idea of how expansive Kemet was in terms of its geography?
Yes, it really just depends on what time period it is because the borders fluctuated. So there's periods of time where Egypt expanded into what we're now calling the Levant. So this is modern day Israel, Palestine
Yes.
area, even going
Mhm.
all the way up to Syria, right? So all of that, the Sinai Peninsula, and going into parts of Nubia, like that was like the largest expanse of it, right? And then there's times where they lost territory, right? So there was a time where they lost the whole delta, and that wasn't part of Egypt, right? And then Sesostris, The third would come in and expand and move the border further south into Nubia, and they'll recapture the delta and make it part of Egypt again. And so it's really, it really is kind of time dependent. But besides the concept of, state borders, you have to remember that human beings, even at this time, even at the time of agriculture, were still moving around. You had people who were nomadic and semi-nomadic. So people who will come into a territory during, I guess a rainy season, and then, move off into another area, and they just travel and interact and the like. And so you had, people coming in and out of Egypt from modern day Chad, right? Of course, coming from Sudan and Uganda, and of course, coming from places like Libya and in the Levant, the Middle East, and stuff like this, coming in and out. So, at some point, it became a multi-ethnic society. I always state that, ancient Kemet was the New York of Africa, during its heyday. And so it is this fact of history that one has to be careful, because what some scholars will try to do is try to make the argument that, of course, the ancient Egyptians weren't Black because you got all this genetic input coming from other areas, right? And so there, like I'm reading in this one article that I'll be citing in the next book, where he, well, actually I cited in this book in the preface, where I'll just read it directly for you. So, how do you prepare for conversations like this, right? Where so his name is William Cooney, and he wrote a text, Egypt's Encounter with the West, subtitled Race, Culture, and Identity. It was published in 2011, right? So he's talking about what does it mean to be an Egyptian. And you're going to, when you really start reading the literature, you're going to see similar notions to this, and why this is dangerous, even though I don't disagree with what he's saying, but there's a context for what he's saying that isn't being discussed. And we'll get to that context in just a second. So he says, being Egyptian, and he has Egyptian in quotes, in the ancient world, therefore, is a complex phenomenon which cannot be tied exclusively to primordialist or instrumentalist perspectives of ethnic identity, but is quite clearly a conflation of both of them. An Egyptian, again in quotes, was not merely someone who lived within the boundaries of Egypt, nor a person who practiced Egyptian religion or spoke Egyptian. An Egyptian, again in quotations, could be all of these or none of these. Like ethnic identity in the modern world, ethnic identity in the ancient world was equally nebulous. That said, despite the often inclusive nature of ancient Egyptian society, the Egyptians were also prone to exclude groups whom they considered to be different from themselves. This has created a lively debate within scholarly literature on the degree to which the ancient Egyptians were racist, right? And so, he's saying in many respects that there really was no ancient Egyptian identity, right? But if we were to include an Egyptian, it would include anybody who was essentially born and raised on Egyptian soil, just like we would be an American by citizenry, right? But there's like no American ethnic identity. And it's kind of similar in that way in ancient Egypt. So the question is, okay, so since we have all of these inputs, all of them could not be responsible for the language, for the religious outcome,
Yes.
the culture. Now there's fragments of culture that could be over time contributed, and we see such things happen in that life. But who was that? What was that initial impetus? Where did they come from? Right? Who do they cluster with? So it's just like, and I always use the analogy of hip hop culture. So hip hop culture emerges out of the African American experience here in the United States. But it became so influential that every territory on the planet has find themselves involved in hip hop culture, right? And so, you can say that, hip hop culture now is a world phenomenon. And, all different types of ethnic groups have contributed to this worldwide culture now called hip hop. But hip hop emerges in a place. It emerges from amongst a people. It emerges within a historical experience. It emerges as a result of a particular type of worldview, a particular type of rhythm that comes from that particular culture. So, there's there's debates right now about, did hip hop start with Jamaicans, versus African Americans, right? But luckily we live in a time where we have video, where we have the founders who are still alive, that we can record their testimonies, and we have written documentation and the like, so we can see, this evolution, this, part of this African American cultural continuum, that goes way back, of course, to the start of slavery in 1619 here, right? And so what I always argue is that you can't talk about hip hop culture until you start talking about the emergence of jazz in Congo Square, in New Orleans. So you have to talk about that history in Louisiana, and how when this left across the country. And so you got to talk about the creation of jazz in New Orleans. You also got to talk about the experience of the Black military men, who weren't allowed to fight and get weapons, but they put them in the bands, and how that rebellious spirit of not wanting to play the way that the Europeans played created a unique rhythm section, and how this becomes the part of the jazz funeral experience in New Orleans, and part of the Southern college jazz, not simply jazz, but marching band. So you got to talk about Southern marching bands, the military experience being put into the music regimes, the creation of jazz, and how all of this creates a sound. And then you find this individual by the name of James Brown, coming out of Georgia, and he has these other two drummers that create this new sound, this funk sound that they're studying the HBCU marching bands, as well as the jazz bands and rhythms coming from the street jazz people coming out of New Orleans, and how this funk emerges, comes into New York, and becomes a certain thing. And then the experience of Cleveland, right? We're in the funk, and how they change funk in its own way. And this comes out, and especially is adopted out on the West Coast of the United States, and how that experience and how all this merges into, the hip hop experience. There's a context for hip hop. Does not emerge out of a vacuum with some teenage kids out of the Bronx, New York, who didn't know how to play their instrument, who were playing records. Whose records were they playing? Whose rhythms did they respond? Like the dances, the dances always match the rhythms of the music, right? So you have these New York kids dancing in a certain way to the rhythms from Southern musicians coming out of. So I say the five Bronx of real hip hop culture in terms of its origins is Louisiana, is Mississippi, is Georgia, is Tennessee, and I lump the Carolinas together, right? Like this is the space from which this music emerges, and then it spreads out, and everybody adapts it into their own way in their own space. And so if you can understand like how I'm saying this in regards to hip hop culture, you can understand the emergence of ancient Egypt, because ancient Egypt doesn't come out of a vacuum. What is equivalent to Congo Square in New Orleans, Louisiana, is the Great Lakes region in Africa, and how they created a culture, created a paradigm, created certain experiences, naming practices, and the like. And just like the funk that comes out of the street jazz and funeral jazz, second line experience in marching bands becomes the funk, and that rises up because the early pioneers will tell you that they were trying to imitate James Brown, what's his name, Meet the Here Comes the Judge,
Pig Meat Markham.
Yeah.
And others. It's a specific type of sound that come out of the 60s. And so hip hop is a decade something later.
So what is yeah?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm saying, so it sounds like what you're saying here and what you're shaping is that is how there is an origin somewhere, but how everything he kind of like spent off that particular origin and kind of took on his own type of or added to that foundational piece, and now we got a hodgepodge of a lot of different little entities that's a part of that collective. That's kind of like what you're saying when you start talking about Egypt?
Yes, to a degree. So for example, going back to hip hop culture. So in New York, they would have these parties, right, on the block. They weren't called hip hop parties then. They were called jams. Now, jam is a Wolof word. It's a West African word that becomes part of the jazz lexicon. So that's why you would have a jam session, right? And in the South, we would have these jams where people would come. We didn't have DJs, at least in this early stage. You would come out with the instruments, and you would have these jam sessions. So sometimes now, in modern times, when you talk about a jam session, it's more so kind of like in practice, in preparation for a show. But the jam was just, community folks coming together in the circle and just playing, right? And so that culture, as we got to talk about the great migrations of Blacks coming from the South in the 40s and 50s, moving up north in places like, New York, Philly, and then of course Chicago, Cleveland and Detroit and going up these areas like this, and of course Pennsylvania in general. There was always blacks there, but we know the Great Migrations kind of pushed a lot of us up north, right? And so we're bringing these terminologies and things. So it's the same thing in ancient Kemet. So when you talk about a king, for example, right? The one of the words for king is Netcher. It's the same word for a divine or divinity or God. It's the same thing in Congo, but they don't pronounce it Netcher. They pronounce it more closer to the original way, which is Nkole, which stands for, because the word Kole itself stands for power, strength, or the ability to make things happen, the ability to create. And so the N prefix is a prefix of agent, like if there's in English we have a dance, like to dance, the verb to dance, and then you have dancer. That suffix in English is the suffix of agent. It lets you know that we're speaking about a human agent, right? So it's the same thing in Congo. So you have the word for power and to create, and then one who has the power or creates in Kole, right? And so in places like, but in other places that K becomes T or Chi. So you would say in Sango, Toro. In Akan, you would say Intoro. In Dagara, you would say Inton. The same word for spirit, because now you can understand what they mean by a spirit. A spirit is an unseen agent that has the ability to make things move. So you'll see all kinds of words trying to encapsulate that. So you'll see words in world languages that mean spirit, like the word spirit means wind or breath. But what is wind? We don't see wind, but we feel it. We see it moving things. That's what a spirit is. It's something that we just can't see in our everyday experience, but we know it's moving things, physical things in some manner, like the wind. Right. You don't see the king. We don't see President Obama and President Biden and President Bush. We see a picture on TV, but we don't see them.
Right.
They're doing things though.
but they are making decisions that have, the power to make things move, in the economy, in the world, or whatnot. These are your leaders. So they're brought to the level of spirit because of what they do. It's not a coincidence that the ancient Egyptians have leopard skins. The priests and the kings wear leopard skins. Because in the origin spot, in the equivalent to the Congo Square, New Orleans, Georgia, Tennessee of Africa, that's what the kings and the priests wear. Mm-hmm. And so when we have these discussions about origins, and you talking about the Middle East and Europe, where did they do that at?
And I want to touch, give our listeners a chance to touch on a few of the things. But what you're saying is something that, when I wasn't as, who said I'm a little knowledgeable now, but when in my infancy of learning these and getting into our culture, and it was always a discussion about the Bible, and I would always bring in one of the keys to deciphering some of these things that we have issues with and taking issues with is language. And that's what you've been touching on. With language itself, that can decipher a lot of the issues that we have in tying people together. And I think you do a good job. And I think that's your approach to a lot of the research that you're doing. Because when you draw a line and intertwine and connect the dots in dealing with language, it would reveal a lot of things to you, and that's something that some of my biblical brothers and sisters, I will always say, hey, study the language. If you understood the language, it would drive home a lot of the issues. But one of the things too, though, I know you got a lecture coming up, and I want uh, because I'm excited about this field of study that we are tending to get into as a world, this quantum physics stuff. And you talked about the qualified field theory, and there was always the grand unified theory, and I think it's a piece of information that we need to understand. And I think by understanding it, it would allow us to operate on different levels of understanding, versus walking around and wondering why things are happening unbeknownst to us. But knowing that, then it can be intentional, some of the things that you do. So you have a lecture coming up dealing with the quantum theory, field theory, and I guess how that relations to the whole unified thing and entanglement and all that type of thing. Can you give us a brief little uh, understanding, simplified understanding of what that is and how that affects us and why we need to know a little bit about it?
Yes. Well, let me back up just a little bit. So, uh, I and some colleagues have deemed October Black Science Month. And, we were, in our own ways, two of the members are mathematicians, one's a journalist, and of course, I'm a computer scientist. And, we are very much interested in getting African people, more familiar and excited about science in general, and utilizing it, of course, to on one level to improve the lives of you and your family, your immediate family, but two, on the second level, being able to utilize that problem solving ability that you develop, when you study to be a scientist, for the greater liberation of African people. And so now in London, or just England in general, they celebrate Black History Month in October. So I was asked to give a talk on the relationship between African, I guess, religious thought and quantum field theory. And so the brother Shakara, out of London, Caribbean, African descent, he heard me talking about a book that I'm slowly working on, titled Quantum Field Theory as African Heritage. And so he wanted me to kind of highlight or discuss some of the highlights of that emerging scholarship. And so, as the book title, and which is the title of the talk that I will be having this coming Wednesday, the 25th, at 2 p.m. Eastern time, right? And so that'll be 1 p.m. Central, and I guess 11 a.m. on West Coast time, Pacific time. And so, which will be 7 p.m. London time, since they're 5 hours ahead of us, right? So, so what I will be talking about is, of course, I'll be describing what is quantum field theory, how does that emerge, and and quantum field theory is really kind of a synthesis and a merging of quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of relativity, right? So it unites relativity with quantum mechanics in a way. Now, what I hope to bring out in this conversation is that this conversation about the quantum, what we're now in our modern day calling the quantum realm, has been a subject of analysis and inquiry for African people since time immemorial. And when you look and really analyze and understand the language piece that you mentioned earlier of these different African traditions, you will see that what they speculated about this quantum world uh, resonates with a lot of major themes in modern quantum field theory. And
Yes.
so I'm not arguing that, they had a large set of equations and they had an E equals MC square and a Schrodinger's equations and the like here. That's not what I'm arguing. But what I am arguing is that this notion that, particles and phenomena emerges out of fields, out of the excitation of fields, is does not originate with European folks. It goes back as far as in terms of written records with the ancient Egyptians. And so when you look at hold on one second, I'm gonna try to talk in why I have my all caps on, that's what I want to know. Because I want to get his name right. So there's an individual, like you can go to his lecture right now. So am I allowed to share my screen?
Yeah, you can. The folks in the radio land can't see it, but
all right,
they'll hear it as you describe it.
No problem. I'll make sure to be thorough in that sense. So let me know when there we go. And so let me just go here. So there's an actual audio. There's an actual video of this here. So this is when you go on YouTube, you can type in the search for quantum fields, the real building blocks of the universe. And the lecturer is Dr. David Tong, right? David T and then Tong, David Tong. So again, the title of the lecture is Quantum Fields, the Real Building Blocks of the Universe. And at the beginning of his conversation, around 9 minutes and 40 seconds, he's going to say the following. He's going to say the best theories we have tell us that the fundamental building blocks of nature are not particles, but something much more nebulous and abstract. The fundamental building blocks of nature are fluid-like substances, which are spread throughout the entire universe and ripple in strange and interesting ways. Right? And so for those, who are not necessarily familiar with, African history and African cosmologies and the like, this won't mean much of what he's saying in terms of a quantum field. So what he's trying to describe, in order to describe the quantum field, he has to use kind of everyday language. And so he's saying these building blocks are not like individual discrete. So when you're talking about a particle, we're talking about a discrete unit of matter, right? So, but the world isn't developed from a quantum a quantized, discrete unit of matter. It is a field, as he describes here, a fluid-like substances, right? But when you go to ancient Egypt, for example, you'll hear about this phenomenon from which all the uh, phenomenon emerge: stars, planets, human beings, trees, or whatnot, all emerge out of this fluid, watery, eternal field called the Noon, or the Nunu. And from this slide, I'm showing that this Nunu, how we're saying new, but it's more like probably like Niwa Nawa, Niwa Nawa Nawa, right? Because they didn't write their vowels. And so, but this is equivalent to the Kikongo concept of the Mbongi. And this is the exact same word. And so I go through the linguistic, showing you that this is the equivalent. So this is what I mean by, you're not going to be able to do this with Semitic or Berber or Indo-European and still have it in the same context as what you find in ancient Egypt. So in the Congo, the cognate for the Nu, the so-called Nu, but it's Nawa, is the Mbongi. And out of the Mbongi emerges a fire force. In ancient Kemet, they talk about, they always talk about the sun gods that emerge out of the Nun, and all of the deities. And so remember what I said earlier about deities. Deities are forces that we can't see in our everyday experience that make phenomenon to be and make phenomenon to move and behave in a particular type of way. And so in modern times, we define that as energy, because energy is defined as the ability to make things happen, right? The ability to make change, the ability to cause things
to move and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's what an energy is. It's the ability to make things happen, right? And so this is why I understand in the language. And so what they're saying, so what the modern scholars in particle physics and stuff are calling, either atoms or just particles, and the underlying forces, talking about the weak and strong nuclear forces, or you're talking about, the force of gravity or the electromagnetic force. I'm not saying we had that, but any of that would have been defined by the ancients as a neter, as an orisha, as an mbomoson,
Mm-hmm.
and in Toro, the gods, so to speak. And so it is the gods that combine, like when you talk about Amun Ra, right? So they're talking about chemical bonds between concepts and how that emerges to make a certain thing. And also the deities can not only represent an individual particular phenomenon, but can also represent an entire system. So when you talk about the god Geb, for example, that is the whole Earth system of beings and forces. When you talk about Shu, or or even Ma'at. Like we think of Ma'at simply as a uh, a phenomenon talking about justice and truth. But Ma'at is also a cosmic deity, and how everything emerges from Ma'at. There's stories of phenomenon coming out of Ma'at. And Ma'at, I show, is the cognate of Mbongi, of the new Nanawa, right? And so this is just an example of coming out of Fukiao's work, right? When he's talking about the empty Mbongi, and out of the Kalunga line, and that word Kalunga is also cognate with Ma'at, right? And so you can see these words here that are cognate. So we talk about Basa language, Imbad, cosmos, nation, Lebog, the village, Juala, because as we have this term called as above, so below.
Right? In earth as it is in heaven. Go ahead. That's
right.
I'm bringing it home to our listeners. Go ahead.
Well, I gotta interrupt you because we're running out of time for the radio broadcast, but we'll be able to continue this conversation online. So you can access on YouTube and Facebook. You can go to my Facebook page. You can go to the 360 Info Network Facebook page. You can also go to Hamtonio's YouTube channel, and that is The Journey with Hamtonio. So you can connect with us on those platforms. I just want to quickly get out an announcement that I promised to give you, and that is for a program at the East Cleveland Public Library. It's called Stolen People, Stolen Bones, Stolen Art. The Hunters, Dr. Jawada Keith Hunter and Claudia Taziza Gibson Hunter, and a few others, and they are going to express their wisdom and expertise in science, art, and activism. And to present Stolen People, Stolen Bones, Stolen Art. It's going to be October 28th at 2 p.m. at the East Cleveland Public Library. So please take advantage of that.
Free event.
Free event, so many things going on, and we got to make sure that people have access to that. Also, I want to let you know that you can go to Got Kush TV on YouTube, and you will be able to plug into some of the programs that Asar Imhotep is involved in. If you are watching us on YouTube or Facebook, you'll be able to see the URL for that. So you can go to YouTube and just put in Got Kush TV, and it'll bring that to you. And Asar, I'm thinking that the lecture that you're going to do on Wednesday is going to be on that channel.
Yes. And so if you go to gotkushtv.com, it'll give you all the details of the lecture series and the like. And so I'm the last one in the series. So every Wednesday was a speaker, and you'll still get access to those speakers who spoke before me.
All right, wonderful. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. And as always, I'd like to thank our engineer, Tone Harley, for pulling everything together and enabling us to do this broadcast on multiple channels. We really appreciate what he does for us. And we appreciate you for listening and watching 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490. WERE. I'm just looking at my clock. Everything go by the clock, 12 o'clock straight up, they gonna cut us off. So just got to get all that out there. We got about 17 seconds. So again, I invite everyone who is listening on the radio, go connect with us on YouTube and Facebook. So many ways that you can get to us, and we can get to this very vital information. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace, everyone.
Peace.
Indeed.
All right. So now we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and all kinds of platforms. The internet is a wonderful thing. We were talking earlier about what you mentioned. I believe it was you, Hamtonia, was talking about Cat Williams, thinking about, are we blessed to be in the times that we're in, essentially? And we are. I mean, despite all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world today, there are some phenomenal things that are taking place, and we have to be mindful of it. I want to get back to this question of geography, but I don't
Oh,
want to prevent you from expounding on what you were sharing before we had to take this break.
right,
So
right.
after
Mhm.
you finish, I want to get to a question of geography, and I think we'll tie in together the conflict in Palestine, or Israel, whatever. It's really important that we talk about this today, and I think you're the perfect person to give us some backstory on that. So,
No
if you
problem.
could, please continue with what you were sharing with us before we broke.
Yes, I'll be quick. So, as I was stating, the when we talked about the quantum field, and Professor Tong was describing, and he had to describe it as a fluid-like substance that is spread throughout the universe. And in ancient Egypt, it is defined, that field will be equivalent to what we call in Egyptology speak, the Nun. And this is found in Congo as the Mbongi. And you can see kind of a graphic representation uh, right here of the Mbongi. And amongst the Bassa people in Cameroon, the Mbongi is called Mbog. And it's a word for cosmos, and also substitutes as a word for nation. And Li Bog, the root being bog, can also mean village and family and society and the like, because your society, your family is a miniature cosmos, right? With the
Hmm.
man being the sun, for which everything orbits, right? That's another conversation for another day when we're talking about family, manhood, and responsibilities. But um, like we see here at the bottom, we have Toli Mbagli Mbag, even the smallest universe or empty set in the mathematical sense, the almost empty. And so Mbag, the universe knew, or the universe down to its barest essential dimensions, the infinite set. Mbag ni Mbag, the universe within the universe, insignificant, indeterminate. And then you have the infinitely small, Li Imbag, the universe of the universe. So when we're talking about these quantum ideas, these quantum universes, we've been on that.
Mm.
It's part of our heritage. And when you go into like modern quantum physics, they'll tell you that the world is there's no such thing as vacuum space. There's these quantum fields, and particles and phenomena coming in and out of existence, out of these fields, right? And over time, enough combinations will happen where the phenomenon sticks into existence and combines to become the kind of phenomena that we see today. And so these are just some of my linguistic comparisons to show you that I'm not talking out of the side of my head, that there's a systematic way in which we describe this in terms of the Mbongi, the Mbog, and the new celestial waters. So I have to go through a whole process of explaining, how the ancient Egyptians used uh, this phenomenon in linguistics we call the rebus principle and paronymy. So words that sound alike can be used to convey in written form certain other phenomena. So we don't have time for that today, but just keep that in mind as we are having a conversation. So I'm saying that to say that this idea of quantum mechanics, of quantum fields, of emergence and things is part of our African heritage. And so if you're getting into these types of fields, understand this within the context of your culture, that your ancestors were interested in. These are the creative ways in which they passed down their hypotheses concerning the quantum world. And some of we can now look at some of these hypotheses that our ancestors created, and to see if there's a way that we can are they scientifically testable. And if they are scientifically testable, let's put together some tests to see what it is um, that they may have been right or wrong about, concerning the nature of quantum reality, the so-called spirit world.
You
right?
know what?
So I'll end with that.
You know what? Before we move on, Brother Sar, I think
Uh-huh.
for our listeners, it's very important, because they may not be as we all still learning this and understanding, but I think the social media and TV and stuff has done a bad job in actually relaying and making our folks understand what our ancestors was really trying to say and express. And what you were talking about and tying in those languages, and then you described how they personified the actual source of the creator and gave it names and anthropomorphic ways to bring about an understanding to the people. And I think by them describing it in such a way that they felt that would make sense to the people to understand what these unseen forces,
Mhm.
today, you know where I'm going with this. So most,
Mhm.
laymen's like myself and people who may start trying to get into this understanding of what our ancestors was trying to say and trying to describe, they get lost in that. So I think if you can somehow put it together for them to understand that they wasn't actually worshiping these particular entities, but they all come from this source that they was trying to describe the power of nature, those elemental forces of nature. Give them names and descriptions to try to describe something.
Yes. It's very simple to understand. The reason why it's kind of complicated for us in the modern world is because of slavery, plain and simple. Jim Crow, Western colonialism, and the issue of them trying to suppress any knowledge of our history and culture to us so that we adopt their mind frame so that we wouldn't challenge the quote unquote validity of their ruling and the power dynamic that exists between us and them, right? And so in that process, of course, you had to adopt Christianity, you had to adopt Islam, and so they demonize the way we teach.
Okay. Mhm.
We teach differently. And so you got to understand pedagogy. So and you got to understand African people being in power and controlling their own education system,
Yes.
right? So when you are a child, they want to keep this. We don't have writing across Africa, so we're very oral tradition type people, right? And so we have to find creative ways to keep certain things in memory. So we design certain things in our clothing. We create, quilts. We have rituals. We have certain celebrations. We have certain symbolic signs that there's a whole story behind a sign, right? And so when you're learning this stuff early, it comes to you in the form of gods and goddesses. These personifications and experiences of certain creative forces of nature, how like we do the X-Men today. Like people don't really know that a lot of these myths, and this is just worldwide, comes from nature. So when you see X-Men and there's an individual by the name of Cyclops, this is the guy who has the glasses and he shoots the red fire beam out and destroys everything in its path. This concept of a cyclops, a one-eyed fire, you know, uh, god, mythological god or whatnot, is simply the personification of an active volcano. And so for Europeans, when they wanted to convey the dangers of a volcano, they personified it in the form of a cyclops. And so you would see a big human with one eye, walking around destroying things and shooting beams, of fire. Right. So we did the same thing, but we called our cyclops Ogun, because Ogun emerges out of the phenomena of volcanoes and the fire and the forging of volcanoes. Except Ogun didn't have one eye, but you can understand why a cyclops would have one eye, because it's just in one big hole or crater from which the lava, emerges. Right. So, when you understand this history, that, you get to a certain age and they're able to tell you now without all of the religious and spiritual, storytelling, and just get to the phenomena itself in plain language. And that's what we did in our circles. A matter of fact, do I have yes, and can I share my screen again?
Absolutely.
So I'll be sharing this on in the program as well on Wednesday. So this is I guess I can go back. So we'll go to here. So you can get a visual of who I'm about to cite. So this is Dr. Sylvester James Gates. He's a theoretical physicist out of MIT, right? And, he's famous for, he wrote, in the physics world, a layperson's article titled Symbols of Power, Adinkras, and the Nature of Reality, right? So there's a more scientifically language article from which this emerges. So this is for the public to understand, but this is built off of one that's just numbers and theoretical physicsy stuff, right? So, but we won't get into that at this moment. But I want to cite, I typed out all of this. This is coming from a lecture of his that you can find on YouTube. It's the E.E. Just Symposium keynote address. So he was the keynote speaker. And it is called Susi and the Lords of the Ring. So it's supersymmetry. That's what Susi stands for, supersymmetry and the Lords of the Ring, right? And so during the question and answer part of the discussion, he makes this statement. And I want us to understand this completely, because this goes to your question. He says, this is what we call vertex normalization in quantum theory. And what it basically says is that the charge that an electron couples to a photon with actually depends on things such as speed and spin, the location, much more complicated than the equation we taught our students in high school. You see, we constantly lie when we teach science, but we lie in the service of truth. We tell people the part of the truth that is appropriate for what they have as a background. It would make no sense for me to walk in a high school classroom and try to teach my students relativistic quantum field theory. So I say instead, Coulomb's law is the end of the story, even though I know that is not a complete, accurate story, but it's good enough for that audience. So when you talk to a scientist, you need to be very careful if you're not a scientist, because you need to know what the scientist is assuming about what you know, because that influences what we tell you.
Okay. Okay.
You get it?
Yeah. Okay.
So It is the same
Mhm.
in African pedagogical
Okay.
circles. So
Mhm.
what I'm telling you, Nun, the watery, and the god Ptah and the god Ra came out of the Nun and created, the earth
Mm.
and Geb, and they had
Mm.
children, and then Osiris and Isis came about. But if we're all in the same fraternity and we're amongst ourselves, well, this is saying the gravitational force. And this particle has a particular type of spin, and it emits an electric charge which attracts this, which has a negative charge, and these two things combine, and da 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 da. Because the general public, we are not quantum astrophysicists. So when Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Greene, and Tong and others are having discussions with us out here as a layperson, they really dumb it down. It may still seem complicated to us, but believe you me, when it comes to those academic papers and they're talking amongst themselves, that is a whole different level of complication. That you just have to have a serious background in physics and mathematics and
Cosmology
game
and all of that.
theory.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
it's a whole background that you have to have. So if you can understand what Dr. Gates, told this audience, you can understand what African people were doing on the continent. And they tell you this verbatim in The Pale Fox, talking about the Dogon, Marcel Griot, who's the of that text. So if you don't know about Marcel Griot, he is a Frenchman who in between like the 1920s to the 1950s lived amongst the Dogon people. So matter of fact, all of what we know about the Dogon, for the most part, comes from him and his team, right? And at the beginning, they were giving him surface information about deities and all this other kind of stuff. But because he was persistent over time and he gained their trust, and he actually fought the French army on behalf of the Dogon who were trying to invade. And when they saw that in terms of his character, because he even lost function of an arm defending the Dogon. The Dogon said it would only be right for us to give him the real information. So they even explained to him that we have the foreword, we have the backword, we have the side words, right? And so the forewords, these are kind of surface things. You get a little bit more detail when we talk about the side word, but it's the backword that the real knowledge comes from. So all we were giving you was the foreword in those early years. And so the Dogon explain it just like Dr. Gates explains it. And so that's the kind of link that I'm talking about when when people want to question, they couldn't have been thinking of things deeper because, this is the God of this. They don't understand African pedagogy. They don't understand the nature of and the experience of trying to explain complicated things to children and laypersons. Right. So in a nutshell, that is, we got to understand pedagogy. We got to understand us, ruling our own educational system and the way that we do things, and how all of this plays out into being able to explain these ideas and phenomena. So of course, in these days, they didn't have large hadron colliders that they could, discover a Higgs boson. but the ideas, the level of thought, the deep philosophical questions that emerge as a result of these things, and how they were able to integrate that into culture, right? In the same way that the Wachowski brothers were able to integrate deep philosophical discussions that were only being had at the Academy in a creative way in a film called The Matrix. And now for, those of us who are Generation X, we can't refer to anything without The Matrix in terms of deception and stuff of that nature, right? Because that's our framework that perfectly explains. But like, how do you get all of these different types of conversations about ethics and reality, to a lay person in a way? Like, you have to create a myth, you have to create a Neo, you have to create a Morpheus, you have to create a Trinity and an Agent Smith. That's what they did, and that's what our ancestors did. This is a human thing. And so when, if you're trying to convey deep philosophical thoughts, deep understanding of reality and cosmos, you have to do it in a very creative way, and it has to be integrated in the culture in a unique way. And those who have the acumen, the mental aptitude and the character to learn more, you initiate them in a school of thought, and they get the finer details. And then they become the holders of the knowledge, and they do the same thing for the next generation.
That's what all them secret societies birthed and things like that. That's where it all comes from. And yes, right on, brother. Right on.
What you just shared with us, Asar, really speaks to the importance of the narrative and the role that Hollywood plays in shaping our perception of reality and history. And that brings me to dialing back to something that we talked about earlier with regard to geography. A few weeks ago, there was an armed conflict that erupted in a place that we call the Middle East. But I was really intentional about asking you about geography because right now, the crux of this whole conflict relates to geography and history. And whose land is it? Who was there? And how do the people who are claiming that land right now have a right to it in light of the history that only goes back to 1948? I'm opening up a rabbit hole, and I'm kind of careful about how I frame this because of the fact that, we're always treading lightly when we talk about certain people and certain paradigms and so forth and so on. But I'm just going back to what you shared with us so eloquently, relating it to the history of hip hop and ancient Kemet and so forth and so on, and the people who existed at that time, and the lack of perhaps an ethnic or cultural identification, and how when we look at what's going on right now, it's specifically tied to a cultural and ethnic identity that has been created for us by those who are shaping the narrative and the history that we relate to right now without an awareness of that history. So, for instance, we talked about the boundaries of the country that's known as Egypt right now, and how that doesn't really accurately reflect the people who existed at that time and the expansiveness of what they were tied to and connected to. So, I guess the question in my mind as I ask this question is, how can the people who are claiming that this land is theirs and so voraciously protect it as they do, and then also acquire the, I guess, support of other countries to defend their right to defend what they're calling their homeland, if it's not an accurate and true depiction of the true history of that land and the people who belong to it?
Yes. So, like, I think about this is it's a very complicated question, because it goes beyond the surface of just the 1948 series of events and what the British promised the Arabs there and the Jews. Because if we were to take the Jews' own history as told to them or told to us in the Bible, we know in Deuteronomy, the seventh chapter, right, that this territory was already occupied. It was called Canaan, right? And God commands, allegedly, according to their story, God commands them to go into Canaan and to commit genocide and to take over the land that was already occupied. So they remember that the grandfather of Abraham comes from Chaldees. This is more so like Iraq, in like Sumeria, that area, right? So they come into Canaan, a place that is already occupied, that has a language. It's a few of them. Then they become a family later on of 70 individuals. So this is not a nation of folks. This is at best a small clan or village that existed in Canaan, and they moved to Egypt, and they came out 400,000 strong. In mixed multitude and the like. And then they're ordered to, because God promises them some land, but for some reason, the Almighty God who created the stars, the planets, and things couldn't create new land, so that they wouldn't have to go and kill off and murder and steal land that was already occupied. Right? So the issue here is that you exist on your claim to the land is that we stole the land a long time ago. And then the Arabs come later on and steal the land from us. So we want the land that we stole originally back. And they got the help of the United States and Britain, and they were able to take the land in 1948. And they created an apartheid state. And so even in the Quran, I forgot what book it is in the Quran, but they admit in the Quran that this land belongs to the Jews. So if the land belongs to the Jews, how did you get it? I'm talking about the Arabs, And so it's a complicated thing. At what point do you just chalk it up to history and just start and just try to make the best of a particular situation, like we're trying to do here in the United States? So you have a group of people who came from Asia in very ancient times and who have settled in parts of North and South America. They have been there. Some people have been nomads, have been migrating back and forth, up and down the United States, left and right. Some have settled. Some people have taken land from folks. Some have had their land taken, as a result of conflicts. And then you have these Europeans come in with, superior weapons, and they take the land and bring enslaved Africans, and other folks from Europe come, and now what do you do in a situation like the United States, right? To where the people can't, Black folks just can't all, let's say, I don't know how many of us, I believe it's like what, 50 to 100 million. I don't know what the exact number is of us, but let's just say it's 100 million of us for the sake of argument, right? 100 million Black folks just up and leave and then enter into Africa. What kind of conflicts would that cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a situation here where, for the most part, we're here, right? But this is a hostile territory towards African people and other ethnic groups, and we're trying to make it into a space to where we know we can't change history, but we can create a future that is more equitable for everyone. And we stop the invasions. But let's just say that China says, F it, we want to invade the United States, and they take over the United States. And then, white people up in arms, this is our land. But is it your
I know where you're going with it.
you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right.
So what do you do at this point?
Mm-hmm.
This is the essence of the conflict here. So you have Arabs and Jews fighting over stolen land.
Mm-hmm.
The land belongs to neither of them historically.
Mm-hmm.
So so this is what is happening. Is really, this is how I word it. You have two mafia groups, two mafia families fighting over territory to do illegal business in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And and then you have people who are just ain't in this, that are caught in the middle. They just trying to live their lives. They're not hungry for power. They just want food, clothing, and shelter for their family and children, and to
be treated humanely. To be treated humanely. To be treated humanely. Just live and let live. Why we having problems with that? Why is that a problem? And if you got all these religions who talk about, even the Bible, don't kill, treat people like you, the old golden rule, treat people like you want to be treated, and this, that, and other. What's the problem here?
The problem is that both of the religions encourage the stealing of people's lands and territory and genocide. That's the problem. It's the culture. And so the question you asked, my immediate response, you talking about, what was going, what's happening, I'm like, it's ultimately an issue of character, culture and character. That's ultimately what it is. And so, the consistent apartheid system in, because if the Arabs had the power and stuff, they would do the same thing. That's what they do to others. So whose side am I supposed to take? If the Crips and the Bloods are fighting in the neighborhood and little kids are getting shot by stray bullets, and one of the homies on the Blood side and one of the homies on the Crip side, gets killed, do I root for the Crips or the Bloods? They're terrorists in our neighborhoods. Sure, they're Black African people and there's context for how it emerges, but there becomes a point where that doesn't matter. Because now it's not about what it originally was. Because the Crips and Bloods started, the Bloods started as a result of the Crips bullying the people, and the people needed to come together to create a gang to fight against the Crips. But the Crips started as a gang to fight against the white people who were terrorizing the Black people coming home.
Like kind of an offshoot of the Children of the Panthers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So you had no guidance. They were trying to be like the Black Panther Party at the beginning, but since that was dismantled and they didn't have organization and guidance, and you still have the issue of poverty. So these are teenagers, these are kids who start this. This is stuff you join in middle and high school. Black Panther Party was adults. All of these folks are college kids who started these things, and so now because they're reading books and looking at ways of governance and stuff like this. But when you don't have those adult men around and you have kids trying to organize and do stuff, they only see you in the black leather, talking crazy to the police, standing in the front with the guns. They don't have the 10-point program and the raising of the funds and distributing food and all that. They're not thinking along them lines because they only see something else without being in conversation with the elders. And so, they're still trying to survive and exist in extreme poverty and drugs. At the time, it's heroin that's sweeping the Black nation, right? So now, they start fighting each other, and it's quiet as kept. LA is not that big, and so you bully and kill somebody, they got family spread around. And so now that's personal. So, I got to get my get back. And that's all it is now in Israel, in Palestine. I got to get my get back. It's not about, yes, it's about this because they're continuing to oppress us. We got all these checkpoints and they're coming in, shooting children, and we can't do business and trade. We have all these embargoes. We can't leave. It's a powder keg way. And what do you expect? Basic physics would have taught you this. Any action is going to automatically provoke an equal reaction. That's physics. So you can't oppress people and treat them in a certain way without them responding in the natural way, because the first order of business of any organism is self-preservation. And so this was happening here in the United States. That's why they had to do something, because Black folks was like, nah, we ain't taking this no more. And if there wasn't some legislation passed, if there wasn't some kind of integration into the society, we would have been Palestinians here in the United States.
All kind of guerrilla warfare and stuff will be going on.
Exactly.
Walking on the streets.
Well, in essence, we kind of are, because we've had land taken away from us, and we've been marginalized and persecuted and prosecuted and all those things. A couple of things as I listened to your comments. One, I was just asking myself the question, and perhaps you can answer it. Do we accept the Bible as a historical document, or is it a book of allegories, stories, metaphors, so forth and so on? And then the other thing to me, which is perhaps it's a superficial way of looking at it, but you look at the 10 Commandments, and one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not kill.
Yeah,
but then you talked about a system of genocide and the advocacy involved in, well, go out and just take folks' lives so we can take our land back. It just seems like such um it just such,
Hypocrisy.
it's hypocrisy, it's a contradiction,
Mhm.
and you hold these principles, these so-called religious principles, to heart, and your entire existence is based upon those things, yet you do those things. And when you look at what's happening in that land right now, and it's not just Palestinians, it's us over there, it's Falasha who have been persecuted and so forth and so on. It doesn't make sense to me.
Let's just look at the whole piece too, though. What one thing we tend to do is forget, when that what emerged out of that whole history that Brother Asar was talking about, and going into Canaan and all that, all that historical stuff that took place. We tend still to forget our plight in the relationship that Arabs had with Africans.
Exactly.
We can give them a pass for their startup until our demise. As Africans, we don't talk
Because
about
it's a rule in Islam that, uh, like, let's say, for example, that, I'm an African religious practitioner. If I wanted to practice my indigenous religion, I would either be subject to a jihad if I don't convert to Islam, or I have to pay a tax. In other words, I'm being exploited in order to practice my indigenous religion. Like, they have no concept of live and let live. The very nature of the system itself is oppressive and is anti-African. So I don't sympathize with any side, because again, at the end of the day, they lack character.
Mm.
And they want everyone to get involved in their mythology. Both mythologies, whether you're talking about the Bible or whether you're talking about the Quran, is here to justify their insanity.
Wow.
And so, in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, in the Exodus, they allegedly come out of slavery, out of Egypt, and then one of the first commands is for them to purchase slaves and how to treat their slaves.
Wow.
You come off of Moses comes down of a mountain, and he writes in Hebrew letters in some tablets to these particular 10 commandments, which include thou shalt not kill, or thou shalt not murder, and thou shalt not steal. But then later on, he commands the Israelites to go into Canaan and to murder the Canaanites and the Amorites and the Hittites. So what are we talking about here?
It sounds like some man putting in his own crap, into some religion and prophetic doctrine to rule and control a group of people. That's what it sounds like to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know. It's just again, it warrants some serious research as people with where these doctrines actually has its origins, and where and what has been, just like everything that we should be dealing with today. We
Mm-hmm.
for all the information that is coming out and still coming out, we should be scrutinizing every piece of material that we are receiving at this particular point. For the
Exactly.
information is out there and it's coming. You should be taking nothing as fake value for what you see. Last little quick point. Somebody shared, and I thought it was kind of funny. I never thought about it like this, but an African brother. Somebody sent the video to me, and the African brother was waking up, man, and he was saying something about their encounter with West and how they came in with the Bible. He was like, "Is that the only book you could have brought?" There were science books and health books and chemistry books out there. You all you gave me was the Bible. So he said, "Come on, man. There was no other books around but the Bible." So you see where you wanted to take me. You wanted to take me right here to this indoctrination, but you ain't gonna give me nothing else to help me. In any other field of study, but you're gonna give me the Bible.
Well, Ham Tony, I just want to thank you for making that point, because I was thinking as Brother Asar was referring to all these books, and he was referring to the scientists and so forth and so on, and even his own research is it's all connected to books, But when you look at contemporary society and you ask the question, what was the last book that you read? Some people haven't read a book since they were in high school. But then when you look at the content of all these books, I mean, just think about the library that existed in that place called Kemet that was allegedly destroyed or appropriated by the Greeks and taken back. And it was the basis for all the things that they take credit for right now. All of that was wisdom and knowledge and information that was in those books. So what we should be doing right now is exactly what you're doing, and that is reading books, gleaning information from those books, creating theories or ideas based on what you're seeing, in the interest of progress, in the interest of illuminating people, and in the interest of making the lives of people better, just based on what you're talking about quantum field theory. I would venture to say that 90% of the folks who are watching us right now probably never heard of quantum field theory and don't know how it relates to them. You talk about vibrations and so forth and so on, and I'm here to testify. I connected to this whole idea of quantum healing, and yesterday I hooked myself up to something that creates frequencies. And these frequencies have an ability to affect your body, but not just your body, but your mental state, your spiritual state. All these things are connected. I was thinking about, as we were talking about this whole idea of quantum, and you were talking about the unseen, and you were talking about particles being fluid and so forth and so on. And then I started thinking about, wow, 5G, 4G, 3G, 6G, all this stuff that's unseen and it's affecting us. I watched a video this morning, which was a TED talk by a person who is very much into frequencies as a healing modality, and he took a tuning fork and he struck the fork, and there was a fork next to the fork. And when he held the fork, the other fork was still vibrating. And then I thought about how they can use sound and frequencies to affect us in certain ways, and how they have developed weapons that use frequencies, low vibrations, to affect us in a negative way. So all this stuff is relevant, and it behooves us to be aware of this so that we can use it to our benefit as opposed to using it to our detriment. But the whole time, there are folks that are aware of the power of these frequencies, and they're using these frequencies right now. So this is so important, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. The things that we're talking about are so deep that, and I challenge people who are watching right now and listening to go back and listen to this broadcast. Take the time to dissect it. Take the time to digest the information that is being shared with you by Brother Asar, because we live in a superficial world, folks. And we can get so immersed in talking about Will and Jada when it has absolutely nothing to do with us. But we'll spend hours, listening to people talk about them and who's right and who's wrong and all. It it don't mean nothing to us. What we should be focusing on is the things that we can do to improve ourselves, to live our best lives, to live in our purpose, and to live for the benefit of others as we carry out that whole idea of Ubuntu. I mean, that's really what, for me, that's what it comes down to. So I every time I saw it, and please don't think that I'm just trying to blow you up or anything, but every time we have these conversations, I'm just so amazed at the knowledge that you share and the awareness that you have, just like the linguistics piece, just like being that person who would say, well, they thought it was this, they thought it was that. I'm looking at it this way, and I'm doing research to support the things that I'm thinking about, just to give us another perspective, because that science is about proving something, and so you run this test over and over and over again, and as you run that test and you get the result, then you can lean on that as proof of whatever that theory is. So I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, brother, and I encourage the audience, listen to this again and get out of it what you can. And every time you listen to it, I promise you, you will find something else that you didn't understand before that now you do.
Hey, just to piggy on back, and I think that our listening audience would remember, if you just remind themselves. Remember, I think it was the Dominican. Remember, these people was traveling outside the country and they was getting hit with these frequencies and something, and they didn't know where it was coming from, what was going on. They was getting sick and things like that. That's to let you know that they working with this and been experimenting with this for a while. So that type of technology is there. So I remember years ago reading something that the Army have, and it was something I was just recently ran across. They talked about how they could send this frequency out to you, and to disperse crowds and to make them feel uncomfortable through these vibrations, these vibratory energies, and almost cause you to go insane, get inside your brain with these frequencies. So they have this technology. So at the same token, if they're able to do this, because they always take new technology. That's something that Brother Sekou was having an argument with. If you don't have a spiritual foundation, when you get into these scientists, you're always trying to weapon. That's what's wrong with this light skinned man. He always trying to weaponize everything that he sees, rather than using it for the best of mankind and understanding and living in harmony to make you go within yourself and understanding this big thing they call the great source and how you're supposed to live. No, he wants to see how he can dominate it, control it, and weaponize these particular things. So if you know they can do it to control a crowd like that, they can do it, fine tune it in a certain way to have those subtleties to have you and manipulate you into certain type of behaviorisms and emotions.
Real quick, I
Mhm.
saw a video with Billy Carson last or earlier in the week, and he apparently had been to Egypt and he had visited some of these places that we revere so much. But he was talking about these underground tunnels and networks and so forth and so on. And he somehow was able to get access to one of those places. I don't think it was under the Giza Plateau, but I don't remember exactly where it was. But at any rate, there was a place underground where there was
Mhm.
granite that had been melted. And he talked about the temperature that would be required to
Yeah,
melt
that's what
granite.
I'm saying.
Yeah. And then, Asar, when you mentioned Cyclops
Mhm.
and his ability using that volcanic heat to do something like that, Billy Carson is into Anunnaki and all of that, these different beings and so forth and so on. And basically what he was saying was there was some entity that was underground that was able to focus some type of heat energy,
Mhm.
naturally, when I heard that and I heard you say what you said about Cyclops, I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe that's what it was. I don't know, just a guess hypothesis on my part. But what was really interesting to me is that all of the scholars that I've connected with who have talked about Kemet have never mentioned that underground piece. I've been to Kemet a couple of times and may go next year. And I'm just wondering if you have an awareness of that underground piece and perhaps how that might be relevant to our understanding of what we were doing back then and the technology that we were privy to. I mean, you know, he described the Great Pyramid at Giza in an industrial way. You know, when you go inside, you're not seeing Medu Neter. You're not seeing the things that we see in other places. But then when you look at the precision in which it was built, and you look at the fact that you have a star shining into a chamber, you know, once a year, twice a year, based on natural phenomena, you know, there's so much that we don't know about what they were doing back then and how far advanced they were. And this is something that we aspire to as we struggle to explain how they did things.
Yeah, it's I'm weary of Mr. Carson's analysis on certain things, but you know, when it comes to like I would have to see specifically what underground, because you know what's underground today may have not been underground then. It could have just been buried under a lot of dirt and sand over time. So remember, like when you see uh, Brother Anthony Browder, you know, digging out King Karakamun's tomb, like, you know, years later, you can see like a big area that you could walk in, but it wasn't above ground. It was today is underground. Remember, the Sphinx was underground. They had to dig the sand out. So, you know, and unless it is, you know, clearly like at the below level and under where, you know, it's like a shape, like a tunnel shape, you know, we would have to see it in that context. And then, you know, like people think you need super technology to create hot stuff. You know, they had mirrors back in the day in Egypt, and you can create stoves out of mirrors. Because it's like if you've ever had like a magnifying glass or something like that back in the day, and you know how the sun, like you can make things softer and melt. And then again, I just have to see what he's talking about in terms of melting, like how you know it's melted. You know, like so I'm not going to judge because I haven't seen what you've seen.
Right.
I just, if you can send me that particular link. But in terms of the technologies and techniques, you know, that is still for the most part a mystery of how they were really getting this stuff done. And I wouldn't say necessarily that the technology was better. There was just a technique that we just no longer use in terms of building and things. And for me, you know, the question of like when we were talking about the pyramids having some light, you know, shine in a particular window space, the manpower and resources in the organization needed to stack, you know, millions of tons of stone in these particular ways just to get some light to shine through like it has to be more than that, because you're not spending that much. How many people died, you know, creating this monument? Like something else, something more important was going on that, you know, that, because remember the pyramids stopped in the Old Kingdom, and not a narrow pyramid was built after that until the Nubians, you know, started building building these miniature pyramids in the Sudan, right? But why did they stop all of a sudden? Did they create something more advanced where the whole pyramid structure was no longer needed? You know, and so, you know, for them to waste all of those years and manpower and resources just to have a star align, you know, in a window that they can see, they would have to have known the star prior to,
Yes.
You know, and where its alignment would be in order to design the pyramid to align with the star. So it couldn't have been just the star. Now, if it was a big, you know, clock, or, you know, like this helped with in terms of planting seasons and being able, like if it was an almanac, like that would make more sense because it serves the larger community. But if that's not the case, you know, that, you know, in my opinion, that would be the failure of the ancient Egyptians. When they could have been using that time and resources to develop a better army, better weapons to defend themselves against the Hyksos and all the other invasions. You know,
I see your point. Good. That's a good point there. Yeah. I mean, if you have the technology and there's resources to do that, like you're saying, you know, for all those times that they came in and invaded and pharaohs needed to unite the kingdoms and all that type of stuff, why wasn't those resources put to there? That, you know, so it has to be something real great. And one one thing I just wanted to slip in that, you know, two things that you said in the past is that, and something I've been preaching lately is that if left alone, black folks would do things, and you know, we talked about pedagogy, have a different method of doing anything you give them the chance. You know what I'm saying? We would just do things different. If we had the resources to do it, we learn different, we teach different, we illustrate different. And the second thing that our listeners need to understand, and something that I got from Dr. Finch, we always think that technology or information and growth is always linear. You know, it's not. Who said that? You know, that's when they talk about history repeating itself and things of that nature. It can happen. You know, they could have been operating on a higher tech type of consciousness it was in the past. So just like we look at slavery and being in America, well, that was back in the past. Things to get bigger. No, it can revert back to the situation that it was in the past. Who said things got to get better? Oh, it's better now. They used to lynch
yeah.
us. Who said you can't go back to being lynched? You know what I'm trying to say? You know, you think it's linear and it's gonna get better as time keep going further and further away. No, just like knowledge. You know, we can go right back to the dark ages and be susceptible to those type of small, minute little ways of doing things right back again. So it don't have to be. So to always look at the past as something being primitive, we can mess ourselves up thinking that way.
Well, when you talk about being lynched, we're still being lynched. You know, and we're being lynched physically with the rope and the tree and the branch and all of that. Plus, they found other ways to lynch us that don't
Yeah,
involve
right
the
here.
rope
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
tree, but they're still doing it. So I really appreciate that point, because
Mhm.
this whole idea of progress in
Mhm.
part, to me, is kind of an illusion. I mean, it just like, if you look at it in a political sense, we look at our right to vote in America, right? And we think, okay, well, there was an amendment, you know, some type of legislation occurred, and now all of a sudden we have the right to vote. But at the same, you have entities that
You're backwards.
are discouraging us from doing that. And then on top of that, in terms of legislation, our right to vote in this country has to be renewed periodically. It's not like they said, okay, you can vote now and forevermore, and we don't have to talk about it anymore. You know, it's just like the idea of reparations. I hate to bring this up, but you know, I've interviewed a few people in the past few weeks that have talked about the whole slave piece and so forth and so on. And you know, I just find it interesting that at a certain point, the people who so-called owned Africans in America were given reparations when slavery officially ended. They got reparations. We were promised 40 acres and a mule, but America reneged on that promise, you know. And then you think about the fact that these certain things happen, like the war in Ukraine happened, and all of a sudden the United States has to come to the rescue of Ukraine, and then American dollars go to support that. And now you have the conflict in the so-called Middle East, and American dollars will go to support that. So you can support people and issues around the world, but when it comes time to supporting people within this country, all of a sudden you got amnesia. And no, we can't pay for that, but we can pay for this. So then the question becomes, well, what are your priorities? And who are your priorities? And obviously, we
It's
ain't
not
your
us.
priority,
It ain't us.
you know. And then the real
And
irony
Biden,
is that they have opened the floodgates and they've given their permission, themselves permission to create as much money as they need to address America's problems.
Hey, but
So
Vince. See, but our people though. I mean, we have to be walking around in the days. They telling you in your face. You know what I'm saying? The atrocities that black folks ain't been on nobody's couch. You know, with etymology and not etymology, with epigenealogy and things of that nature, and the psychosis that went through with us and passed along. We ain't been on nobody's couch. And see, and you know, your LGBTQ ABC elemental P people had stepped in front of you. So they telling you in your face that they don't care nothing about you. They giving everybody across the globe money and come to their rescue. But when you start talking about giving up some dough to help you in this country, they, you know, hey, well, man, we got to talk about that. You know, I don't know. Come on,
oh
they
no,
telling you in your face, man.
we ain't even gonna talk about it. We're gonna take that bill that called for the study of reparations and we're gonna table it and they're gonna push
Yes.
it to the side. And then
Boy.
when somebody
but
wants to get elected, they'll resurrect that issue, thinking that if you hear that somebody might be thinking about giving you some money, then you might want to vote for them. But then after the election, then they put that back in the closet. And who knows, maybe in November of 2024, we'll be hearing about it again.
It blew a little dust off of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's bring this back.
yeah. Okay, well, we're actually at the 2 hour and 7 minute mark in our broadcast today, and I know Brother Asar probably has things to do. I know I do, and Antonio, you being the busy person that you are, you do too. So I think probably now will be a good time to wrap up because we can go down some other rabbit holes and talk endlessly about the things that we're facing right now. But just to remind folks, you can go to asarimhotep.com and you can plug into his universe. You know, I know he's doing a lot. You also have gotkushtv.com. You can go there and access some of the content that he is connected with. And you can also go to asarimhotep.com and get your copy of Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. And he will continue to work on Volume 2 and Volume 3 and the quantum field theory piece that he's working on. Keep doing what you do, bruh. Keep doing what you do. And
Anything parting you want to leave us with there, brother? Son?
no, just at the end of the day, it's always going to boil down to character. And when we're studying these issues of history, first and foremost, look at the people's character who was involved.
Good point.
And once you understand the nature and the character of the people who are involved, then you can understand how it plays out historically. And so with that, I appreciate, the continued love and support from you guys in this channel and the listening audience. And I appreciate, this time to be able to converse and dialogue with both of you. And so I wish you well, further greater expanse of possibilities and prosperity to the 360 Info Network and beyond. And I look forward to more conversations and seeing this conversation expanded amongst the population.
all right. Well, with that, as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your absolute best day. Peace, everyone.
Peace.